welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Michael Hull, a filmmaker, a podcast producer, and whose feature documentary Betrayal at Rediscovering debuted on HBO Max in 2021. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show. Welcome to India. And I'm sure what we are going to talk about, about using the lessons from radio for podcasting, that will be helpful, not just in India, but all across the globe. There are so many markets developing in terms of podcasting. US, Canada, Brazil, even India is coming up very strongly in that. So all these lessons will certainly be of help, Michael. So first to understand from you, and I'll come to the podcast bit of it, and the radio bit of it, is that you hate movie podcasts. Why do you do so? And what's the reason behind it, being a filmmaker yourself?
Well, I mean, I also love some movie podcasts, but a lot of them, it's not just in movie podcasts. That's just the ones that I listen to a lot of, and the show that we have. But there are a lot of podcasts where, there's no sort of structure to it. It's really just sort of about the host personality. And so if you are a friend of that person, or they're your cousin or something, maybe it's interesting to listen to. But especially a lot of movie podcasts, people, they're really long. A lot of them are like 3 or 4 hours long, and it'll just kind of be two people talking about one or two movies. And to me, I'm not sure who their audience is. I'm not sure who they're hoping to have as an audience, but I find them just sort of tedious and very hard to listen to. And it just seems to really proliferate in the movie podcast universe. So when I was starting a movie podcast, I really wanted to go out of my way to not do that thing.
Right, Michael. For the understanding of our audience, simple audience, a lot of people in India are in the regional areas and in rural areas. And for them, even I want to understand for myself, what exactly is movie podcast? Is it all based on movies, or is it different than that?
So the podcast that I do is called A Very Good Year, and I do it with a film critic named Jason Bailey, who's a writer for the New York Times and Vanity Fair and lots of fancy places he writes articles for. And then I am a filmmaker, and we've been friends together. We used to make movies together. We've been friends and watching movies together for a long time. So we talk about movies. We have a guest on for every episode, and our podcast called A Very Good Year, and we have them pick their favorite year of movies and then 5 movies from that year. And so we start off, we just sort of introduce the guest. We hear about them. We've had Academy Award winners. We've had critics. We've had technicians. We've had lots of different people who are involved in the movie business in one way or another. They pick their favorite year of movies. They pick 5 movies they love from that year. And then we talk about that year in general, not just about movies, but about sort of what's happening in the world and politics and stuff like that, because movies are don't exist in a vacuum, right? They're made by people who are living on Earth. So it's sort of what is happening in the world around us is impacting the movies that are being made and the people who are making them. So, but it's interesting also to hear not just Jason and I's opinions, but to have our guests on. And, when you have a guest on who's a director of photography, or a guest who's we had the production designer for lots of different movies. She did Brokeback Mountain, for instance, right? So she has a very particular way of looking at movies. And she has a very particular sort of movie family that influenced the way she watches movies with Ang Lee sometimes. She has a different sort of perspective than Jason or I or anybody else. So I think that a lot, a movie podcast is a podcast where people talk about movies. But of course, like any other podcast, there's lots of different versions of that. We did one called Fun City Cinema that was more like sort of a radio lab for movies. Like a more sort of a magazine style show instead of a chat show. There's a great show called You Must Remember This by Karina Longworth that is a magazine style show. And she was, in fact, a magazine writer for a long time before she started doing podcasts. So hers, these shows have music in them. They have clips from the movies. They have clips from interviews, of the directors and stuff sometimes. So they talk about movies, but we try to talk about movies in a way that's a little bit deeper and a little bit more varied and interesting than just like, I didn't like it.
Right, right. So you are a filmmaker. You don't like movie podcasts. You are a podcast producer. You say that the quality of a lot of podcasts that can be bettered today because there is low entry, no hardly any entry barrier to that, and many people have come into podcasting. Fine, that is very democratic, and you believe that podcasts can be made better and one can learn a lot from radio. Tell us about this, so that people who are already into podcasting or people who are thinking of coming into podcast, there is this whole big world of podcasting waiting to be explored by many countries in the world, so they can make use of your understanding of your radio and put that into podcasting. What exactly? Make it almost like a step by step so that okay, these are the things I can bring from radio. These are the things I will put it into my podcast, and that is what will work better than what we are producing right now.
Sure thing. There's different things you can do to make your podcast better. For example, you have one of the things that you can do just already in your title, KAJ Masterclass. We already know just from reading that one thing, we already have an idea of what we're coming here for. So as I'm looking through your podcast feed, like I said, I was listening to you all day today before I was going to come on. And as I'm looking through your feed, I see lots of different people with lots of different expertise. And I have a sense of what they're here for. And I can read in your description, I have a sense of what we're talking about. So some of them are talking about things that I'm not necessarily like interested in entrepreneurial sort of focus, right? But then I can just sort of go by those and find other ones because I know it's a masterclass. I have a sense of what we're doing here. So already in your title, you're accomplishing one of those goals. And there's lots of things that you can do, that are important. I mean, it's, working on your sound and sort of the room that you're recording in can, makes a difference in your professionalism. Just there are things that you can do, stuff like that. But a lot of those things cost money. And like you mentioned, there's a very low barrier to entry for podcasts. There's a very democratic space, right? And that's a good thing. Like, I don't want to make that sound like that's a bad thing, but a lot of the suggestions that I have actually are free. They actually don't cost money to sort of think hard about, what else exists in the podcast universe of what you are want to talk about. So let's start off. If you want to do a movie podcast, you should go listen to a bunch of movie podcasts and see what's good about them, what you don't like about them, and whatever kind of podcast you want to listen to. There are an incredible number of, sort of life coach, business coach. That there are thousands of, I think there's more life coach, business coach, entrepreneur, CEO podcasts than there are actual CEOs or even people alive to listen to them, right? And as far as I can tell, I try to listen to them. They're very, 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 very similar. They're like health podcasts. There's a lot of health podcasts, like try to eat more vegetables, try to walk more often, try to have a little bit less meat and sugar. Like there's not really there's sort of, at some point they sort of run out of things to talk about. So they all end up sounding the same. So whatever it is that you want to enter into, listen to it and find for yourself what's missing. This is sort of a classic idea of business, is fill a hole. Find something that people aren't doing and go do it, or find something that people aren't doing well and do it better. So when we were going to create a movie podcast, I listened to 1,000 movie podcasts, and I got tired of listening to guys just talk about the movie. Fucking Star Wars, excuse me, pardon my language. Like people will just talk about so many Star Wars episodes. Like, okay, at some point we've sort of heard everything there is to say about Star Wars. So unless I really like you as a person and I'm hooked on you as a host, I'm not actually going to listen to your thoughts on Star Wars because I have my own kind of move on, right? And I think that's the case with any podcast. So once you discover what's missing, then you figure out how you want to fill that hole, how you want to sort of do it differently. Like we discovered that there was very little structure. So the next plan was to come up with structure. So the first 5 minutes, we introduce the guest. We let them tell us what their thing is. The next 5 minutes, we talk about the news that was happening in the year that all these other movies were coming out. and then we go into their top 5, and we do 5 minutes per movie all the way through their top 5. And of course, it ends up getting a little loose. Some people talk a little longer, some people talk a little less, but you have a plan. And we even have little sound cues. This is something that you can learn from radio. They, when you hear the little news siren, news, right? Then even if you haven't been paying attention to the show that you've been listening to, the news is about to come on, and you like that segment. Or like we have a song, when we go into a person's top 5, we have a song, top 5, right? And it's a famous song, but it doesn't matter if you've ever heard it or not. When you hear it, it becomes like a radio jingle. And if you're tired of listening to me introduce the news, we're about to listen to the guests do their top 5, right? So there's little things like that, and all of that stuff is free, for you to do. And that comes into your title, that comes into your descriptions. Let me know what I'm going to listen to, because the best hook, if I don't already know who you are, if I don't know if I'm not interested in you as a host, the best way you can hook me is to talk to somebody else I like, or talk about something I'm interested in. So if we have in your title, if I know I want to have a masterclass on how to make a podcast, I know I'm going to go look through your podcast masterclass and find the ones that are about podcasts. And that's how I know I'm going to get to it. So I think it's structure, and I think it's the ability to describe what you're doing. But in order to describe what you're doing, you have to figure it out for yourself. And that's the first step in doing any of these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have actually enumerated it very, very well, Michael, because this is one thing, I also feel that, podcasts have to have a direction. And if you don't have that direction, to be very frank, in terms of, I come from a journalism background, so I always make it a point that the viewers or the listeners, in some way or the other, know what I am talking about, what the person is, who the person is about. But then we also have to make sure that we don't spend so much of time in just talking about the bio of the guest that the listener runs away. So that's why you see I don't take much time in terms of introducing the guest. You talk about the guest, who the guest is, and then you weave that whole discussion or the information about the guest into your questions. Like if I have to take my podcast in a direction where I need to talk about Black Diplomat, your another podcast that you are producing, I will come to that. Or
Right.
if I need to ask about, about that movie documentary that you were talking about, Betrayal at Attica, I can come to that. That gives that flexibility to the host if you structure it in that way. And let me talk for the audience is that my biggest time consumer is not when I am talking to the guest. The most difficult or the time consuming part, or which actually where I need to rack my brain, is to find a right title for the for the listeners to understand. This is going to be the headline.
Yes.
This is what I am going to talk about. That is what takes a lot of time. And the thing is, one challenge is that that may not be the keyword which is making which is trending at the moment. So
Right.
you fight with the keywords or the top keywords at the moment. You don't go and search initially. You can do it if you want to trend as per the Google search or the YouTube search. But if you talk of the listener, then the listener has to get value from what you are getting out the best from the guest. Lest later on you integrate the same thing with the keywords. How to best see what actually works for the algorithms and also works best for the for the listeners. Then that is work. So I just thought I will use this opportunity to share that thing with you.
That's great. I mean, that is exactly what I'm talking about. And also in terms of learning from radio, learning from journalism. Rule number 1 of journalism: tell me what you're about to tell me, then tell me what you just told me. Right? Like that's sort of
Right.
that's like the most basic foundational structure that you learn when you're going into journalism. And from titling, headlines are very important. And as you just mentioned, that sort of working with the headlines has actually evolved with Google searches and SEO and all these different things now. But of course, you know that those words pop up in your descriptions. There's lots of little different ways to do it, but they all revolve around letting the listener know what we're about to do here. You know,
Absolutely.
and then the stuff about not spending too much time on the bio and figuring, sort of working the bio into your questions. That's classic radio stuff. That's exactly what I meant about classic radio stuff. That's one thing they figured out over 100 years of broadcast radio that actually works. There's lots of new things that we can do in podcasting that are important, but there are some really basic things that work in audio entertainment over the last 100 years that actually, I think, do still apply to an audio medium.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can always include the bio, the full bio, if you want, onto the show notes. There it
Sure.
will that will create backlinks. You can add links of your guests, and that will create a lot of SEO as you go. 5,000 characters is not less on YouTube. 4,000 characters is not less on Spotify. That works, and that goes all across to any podcast service that you use. It will give that thing to it. But the biggest thing is you need to serve the listener, and sometimes the headline may not be very trending in terms of keywords, but in terms of listeners, they would be the one who would be interested in that sort of a headline. So sometimes you need to sacrifice the keyword for the time being, and later on you come to a better quality headline which gels with the thing. And I also like the thing about segments. And you put that's the same thing we do in television. If
Of
it's a half an
course.
hour shot, you got three segments, and then you divide. It creates that pace for the show. But you tell me, how have you envisaged that segment for the podcast for the listeners, if you want to say?
It's just, I mean, it's very simple little things of little music breaks and little audio things. So people just sort of, if somebody listens repeated, to several shows, then they get to a sense of sort of where you're at in the show. And it also sort of gives you a moment, especially if you're going to do a show, that's an hour long. I mean, it's nice to sort of break every now and then and sort of remind people of where we're at and sort of what we've been talking about, and not just barrel through. Like you mentioned, Black Diplomats is another show that I produce, and I don't actually, I talk on A Very Good Year. I don't actually talk on, I'm purely background on Black Diplomats. There's a host named Terrell J. Starr. He is a genius. He spends half of his, life or more in Ukraine, and he has been for several years. So now, he's a journalist. So now, of course, when the Russian invasion happened, the full scale invasion happened, he was there. And so, all of a sudden there was a sort of attention on our show about politics in Eastern Europe that had never had that sort of, that much attention on it before. And these are very heavy conversations. We're talking about nuclear policy. We're talking about war. We're talking about humanitarian aid. We're talking about people trying, refugees trying to leave the area. It's all heavy, heavy stuff. And if you just come on and talk for an hour, like, it's very hard, to sort of, for people who, especially people who are somewhat new to the subject, it's very hard for them to follow along. And if you're going to grow your show, ideally you would like to have people coming into it who are new, at least, somewhat new to your subject matter, right? And who are interested for whatever reason, and they come to you as a source of learning. So now if you're just finding out about Ukraine, and you're coming into our show, it's important for us to stop and to include, we include news clips that are sort of relevant things that we're going to talk about. And so that's another way to sort of use voices that people are familiar with. If you hear Joe Biden or, somebody, even if you don't know, Anthony Blinken's voice or Zelensky's voice, if I tell you who that is, and then you hear a little clip from them, it sort of resets your mind a little bit for when the host comes back and starts talking. So there's different ways to sort of break these segments up, but the important thing is to always tell the listener what you're doing. And now we're going to go to this, and now we're going to talk about that, and now, and it's not because they're dumb. It's because you recognize that they might be driving, they might have children, who knows what sort of you can never predict what's going on in a person's life, but especially if you're going to talk about things that are complicated and that they've got distractions. It's not bad to sort of continually sort of update people about what we're doing and what the importance of it is.
Absolutely. So, to be fair to podcast hosts or podcasters, is that how do you put all those clips into your show, because not everybody is from a technical background or production background. And even I try to I struggle with all those things myself, even though I have a television background, but much more on the editorial side. I always used to run away from the technical side of it. Whatever little I've learned only during my podcasting journey. So how do they make the best of what you are suggesting within the means, limited means that they have got? Most of the podcasters, they do not earn anything out of the podcast that they are producing. So how do they bring all that in to make the podcast better, and as well as make sure that they are not losing money on that?
Yeah, it's sort of hard for me to answer that question because, like, being a tech person is, how I've paid my bills for a long time. I get paid to be an artist and a thinker sometimes, but I get paid more often than that to be a technician, and be a movie editor, film editor, stuff like that. And the way I get my movies done a lot of times is because I can do a lot of the tech work on my own. I can't do all of it, but I can do enough of it to be able to show the people that I can't. But at this point, there are, and Terrell has started doing this for Black Diplomats, where he's over there filming lots of things on his phone, and he got tired of waiting for me to be able to edit all of them. So he started learning programs. There are at this point lots and lots of free editing programs, and they all work fairly simply. The hardest part is not necessarily figuring out the programs as sort of having the ideas and sort of understanding what it is that you're trying to do. And really what you want to think about, there's a very simple phrase: if it's not helping, it's hurting. And this is something that, some of the greatest filmmakers I've ever known have held on to the phrase, if it's not helping, it's hurting. And so if you want to use a clip, like let's say we're going to reference a news clip for Black Diplomats or a piece of a film, a movie for A Very Good Year. You're going to go in and listen to the thing that you think you want to talk about. And what you want to do is you want to make it as tight as possible. You want to have as little sort of extra stuff on it as you possibly can. And again, there's lots of editing programs. If you have both Macs and PCs come with their own sort of video playing programs at this point. And a lot of times they'll have at least a trim option. So, if you have a 90-second clip and you only want to use 30 seconds of it, if you have a Mac, like, you can do that automatically in QuickTime, and QuickTime comes free with the computer. I don't know I can't, because PC is a lot more, you have a lot more options in the PC universe. Right. But a lot of the players at this point, even like the VLC player, which is free and I know very useful worldwide, the VLC player has a trim and export option, so you can take your long clip, which you can download from YouTube. A lot of things can be downloaded from YouTube, or they can be, you can you can torrent things and stuff like that. That's your discretion. Everybody's, every country has different rules around that kind of stuff. But a lot of times also you're using, audio that you've recorded on your phone, or video that you've recorded on your phone or something like that. And your phone players will usually have a trim option. So you can cut it down from your long section to your short section. And then as far as dropping it in, I'm not sure if, I'm not sure about StreamYard, but for instance, I've used, there's lots of different ones. There's Riverside, there's lots of these different sort of streaming options. And they usually have the ability to drop clips in very similar to a radio show. So it's really just a matter. It's not necessarily a matter of sort of learning how to do it as having the idea for the things that you want to do, so I think that you can, but the one other pointer that I'll give that a lot of people in podcasting, I think, don't think about is to write yourself a script. I think that's one thing that it's very common for television, but I think podcasting, a lot of times people don't write scripts. And even if you don't write out every single word you're going to say, to sort of give yourself bullet points will help you figure out where you want to put your clips and what exactly you need out of the clip. And, the other thing is, one of the advantages of recording and writing and editing things is that you don't have to put out everything the first time. I know you do your show live. To me, that requires an enormous amount of bravery. I've
done more than 600 of them.
Well, okay, practice maybe more than bravery. Even I myself am not confident enough to do live shows normally. I wanted to do your show, so like I'm gonna come on and I'm
Like
gonna
I
tell
will,
my way
I'll
through
tell
it.
you, yeah, it happens. You see, there are so many factors. Like right now, there's power has gone off, and I don't know what time. Normally, it takes only few seconds to come in, but right now it's not coming. So it's on the backup, only working for the laptop, only for the internet. Rest no lights are there. So I'm just hoping that this backup power for the internet stays along. It's been charged enough for the show. So there, but you see, the live part is that it keeps you alive for the good thing. So
Man, this is
you feel
you're
that you
struggling
feel that
through
feel that thing.
you're struggling through deeper waters than I even realized. you got
Right,
you got worries on your head too. But
right.
I
I
think
that
I really do believe in recording scratch tracks and editing and listening to yourself and seeing if it really sounds like what you want it to sound like and if it's up to the standard that you want it to be. After
Absolutely.
600 episodes, I think you could have confidence.
Thank you. It's nice to so many things I've learned from you today, and I'm sure so will a lot of people on this. Not only in the video but also audio, and later on we'll put it out on blog so people will learn. I wanted to ask a couple of questions more, but I don't want to take that risk. I just need to check what is happening with this. Otherwise, I don't want it to get so what is the best way for people to connect with you, learn more from you, and also to engage with you professionally, Michael?
I am on Twitter at brainwashedlib, and I have a website at fifthcolumnfilms.com. We also have websites for Black Diplomats and for A Very Good Year. And I answer all of those emails. So I'm pretty, as far as my attitude and opinions and goings on and links, Twitter at brainwashedlib is easiest. But if you want to contact me through Black Diplomats or A Very Good Year website is an easy way to find it. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I really like your show, man.
Thank you, Michael. With all these words of wisdom, of great production, of great using radio for your podcast. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.